Thursday practice in Bahrain is over and the fastest driver of the day was Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, as Mercedes have come out swinging on the first day of practice. But the question is, what did we learn? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be doing a data analysis from practice. If you enjoy the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get straight into the video. As usual, I'm going to be talking about the top 5 teams, which is Aston Martin, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull later on, so stick around for that. As usual in Bahrain, FP1 and FP2 take place in completely different conditions. FP1 is during the day and FP2 is at night, which is when the race and qualifying will be taking place. Because of this, in FP1 we typically see some interesting results, and this season it was no different. Haas opted to completely abandon any fast runs and just did long runs all session long, and the fastest driver in FP1 was Daniel Ricciardo in the VCARB. But how does his time in FP1 compare to the fastest lap in FP2 by Lewis Hamilton? Well, let's take a look at both and compare the two times from each session so we can see just how much faster they were able to go in second practice when the track had rubbed in a little bit more and the temperatures had come down. The first thing that you will notice in this comparison is that the top speed of the Mercedes is higher than the VCARB, showing that between the practice sessions, the teams had opted to increase their engine modes for more performance. Also, when it comes to the braking zones, you can see that the Mercedes is able to carry more minimum apex speed, which will be down to more favourable track conditions, and also the Mercedes is overall a better car. Through the higher speed corners, you can also see that the Mercedes is able to carry more speed in these sections as well. Ultimately, this comparison shows two things. Firstly, it is the difference between a midfield car and a front-running car, but also it shows just how much the grip has come to the drivers in that second session, as the conditions are far more favourable for them as drivers. As usual with practice, one thing to look out for so that we can get a sense of the engine modes and the downforce levels is to look at the top speed when it comes to the drivers' fastest laps. So I've brought up the top speed from each team when they were setting their fastest laps, and what it shows us is quite interesting. Haas obviously had things turned up a lot more in FP2, which would explain why they were able to place so highly up the order with Nico Hulkenberg, as they reached a top speed of 319 km per hour. The Mercedes powered cars also had a good form of top speed. We are used to seeing that from Williams, of course, though. One thing that surprised me though is the top speed of Ferrari and Red Bull. This shows me that they both still have a lot more to give, as does McLaren. Red Bull is still 7 km per hour down on their top speed from Q3 last year when Max Verstappen set his pole position lap time. This might help explain why we saw what we did when it came to the fastest times. So with all of this in mind then, in the midfield, what teams are looking good and what teams didn't look so good? Well, one team that didn't look good and is definitely not going to be looking good for some time it seems is Alpine. The Alpine team after pre-season testing definitely did not fill anyone with any real confidence. It seemed clear that the car was going to be off the pace, but it seems to just be heavy and underpowered. The downforce levels are probably not there yet as they've gone down a different route, and it's going to take them a number of upgrades to get back to the pace. With this in mind, it could just be that the Bahrain Grand Prix for Alpine is going to be a glorified test session, similarly to how Bahrain was for McLaren this time last year. For Alpine though, they need to make sure that they can bring some upgrades and get some performance back on the car quickly. Alpine may have had a bad day, but one team in the midfield that didn't have a bad day, and it's actually looking pretty good, is VCARB, as they had a great day, especially with topping the times in the first practice session. They followed this up with decent pace in second practice as well, which you can see here when you compare the longer runs of Daniel Ricciardo to Zhou Guanyu and the Alpine of Pierre Gasly. Here you can see that Ricciardo is not only more consistent than Zhou and Gasly, but also Ricciardo in the VCARB is able to maintain the pace better than his rivals, showing once again that the VCARB is a great little race car, and they are looking like they are going to be in a strong position in the midfield. Also, as we saw earlier with the top speed, the VCARB is looking pretty decent, especially if the rumours are true and that the Honda powered cars are still turned down more than the rest. I anticipate that VCARB will be trying to get at least one of their cars in the points, and on this basis it should be possible that they may even get both cars in the points, as their race runs are looking pretty healthy right now. I just want to say that if you are enjoying the video so far, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. I'm almost at 5k subs, and I would really appreciate it if you help me get there. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about the top 5 teams, starting with Aston Martin. For Aston Martin, their first day in the hands of Fernando Alonso was very impressive, as he was the closest driver to the Mercedes pair when it came to one lap pace. His teammate Lance Stroll, as we come to expect, was a little bit down on his teammates, and he was even beaten by Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas. So let's compare the laps of Lance Stroll to Nico Hulkenberg, so we can see how it was that the Haas managed to just beat an Aston Martin. The main reason why it looks like Stroll was beaten was because of the top speed of the Haas, as I said earlier. I do think that Haas did have things turned up a little bit more, and you can really see that when you look at Sector 1 and Sector 3 for Nico Hulkenberg. However, when it comes to Sector 2, you can see how Lance Stroll is in a much better position, as the Aston Martin is able to make up some of the time that he lost down the straights. And also, his teammate Fernando Alonso was able to make up even more time than Lance Stroll. For Aston Martin, they are looking good, but not as strong as McLaren when it comes to race runs, and this is really who they will be fighting. If Alonso can get a good qualifying lap in though, he could make McLaren's life pretty difficult when it comes to Saturday. For McLaren, their pace is probably a little bit better than what the lap times show. Lando Norris finished FP2 in 20th place after making a mistake in the final corner, and then he chose to abandon his lap. Until then, he was probably in a position to get amongst the Mercedes pair. As for his teammate Oscar Piastri, it was also the same thing, but he at least completed his lap. In doing so, he finished 4/10 off of Lewis Hamilton, but he held the fastest second sector of the session, showing that the McLaren does have great one-lap pace and great downforce for the corners. Let's now compare that lap of Lewis Hamilton to the lap of Oscar Piastri, to see if it is possible that Piastri could have beaten Hamilton if not for the final corner. The answer is no, mainly down to the fact that Mercedes was faster in a straight line, but it could just be that McLaren had things turned down a little bit more, with this still being the first race weekend. When it comes to the longer runs between the McLaren and the Mercedes, you can see here that Hamilton is actually struggling for longer run pace when compared to McLaren. This could be a sign that actually, while Mercedes were fastest today, there is still ground to make up for them when it comes to the race runs, and that McLaren could be focusing more on the bigger picture, which is the race, as that's where they make the points. It looks like Piastri is in a good position when it came to the race runs, which is more than can be said for his pre-season testing performance. For Ferrari, if you look at their one-lap pace, you would think that alarm bells should be ringing, and they're going to be in trouble. However, that's not really the case if you look beyond one lap pace. Charles Leclerc was over half a second off the pace, but his lap was compromised by traffic, especially with Lance Stroll blocking him in turn 1. For his teammate Carlos Sainz, things were going quite well until the final corner, much like with the McLarens. When it comes to the long runs as well, Ferrari, when you compare it to Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, you can see that they're in a good position and things are looking better for them. Last year in the long runs, Ferrari would typically chew up their tyres, and so far, even though it's close with the Mercedes, it does look like the Ferrari might have a bit of an edge when it comes to the longer runs, which for them is a positive and it shows the progress that they have made. Also, one thing to remember is that it looks like Ferrari does still have things turned down more than the likes of McLaren and Mercedes, meaning that they have even more pace in the locker to unleash when it comes to the Grand Prix, so don't be surprised if Ferrari are in a much better position when it comes to race day. For Mercedes, this was really the perfect day when you look at the one-lap pace, as Lewis Hamilton was the fastest in FP2 and his teammate George Russell was the second fastest in FP2. This shows that they have come out swinging and they really want to get back to winning ways after finishing 2023 without a single victory. Let's compare the two laps to see how Hamilton managed to edge out George Russell. In Sector 1, there's not really anything to tell between the two drivers, as they have very similar pace. The difference comes though when it comes to the technical corners of Sector 2. This is where Hamilton is able to edge out a bit of a gap to George, as Russell does make some small errors. Between the two drivers in the quali runs, there's very little to tell, and I think Friday and Saturday is going to be very exciting between the two drivers as they battle Ferrari, McLaren and Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. I think between them it is going to be very, very close. For Red Bull, it potentially looks like that in qualifying they are not going to have it all their own way. However, we saw that last year, only for them to come good again when it came to the race days. And when it comes to the long runs, Red Bull still seems to have an edge over the rest with Max Verstappen. To show that, I've brought up the longer runs of Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, and Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. When you look at these laps, you can see how Red Bull realistically still has a bit of an edge. They don't seem to have the same amount of performance advantage that they had last year, so if they are a little bit behind in qualifying, then they may not find it as easy to overtake and come through the field. However, let's now look at the laps of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. One thing that surprised me from this lap is that Hamilton is overall faster than Verstappen in all three sectors. I anticipated it in Sector 1 and Sector 3, but Sector 2 I expected Verstappen to be faster. However, on his lap it has to be said there was a number of errors that he had to correct, as he didn't look entirely comfortable when it came to one lap performance. This led to Hamilton actually being faster. As I mentioned though, on the race runs, Verstappen looks a little bit clearer of the rest, so if he can get qualifying right, then I feel like it could be an easy race for him. But the competition in qualifying is going to be very tough. So what did we learn from practice? Alpine are not in a good way, and they could be the weakest team this weekend, and they could occupy the back of the field. VCARB have improved just as we expected that they would do. There seems to be a lot more pace still in the tank for Ferrari and Red Bull, even more so than when compared to Mercedes. But even so, Mercedes have definitely improved their car this year. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.